For everybody joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for being here today and welcome to this ICAP webinar presenting the 2021 Emissions Trading Worldwide ICAP Status Report. We are thrilled to have you here with us, and we're looking forward to sharing the latest insights from the report, as well as having a conversation with some key ETS policymakers from some of the jurisdictions highlighted in the report. Many thanks to all of them for being here today as well. We'll be starting with a presentation from my colleague Lena Lee at the ICAP Secretariat. We'll give a quick overview of the report and some of the key messages. And then we'll hear updates from four policymakers from ETS jurisdictions, including Frédéric Brenger from France, Hannah Lewis from the United Kingdom, Kian Guoqiang from Sino Carbon, and Dita Gardera from Indonesia. We are eager to have you engaging with us throughout this webinar, and you can pose questions to the panel by using the Q&A feature, which can be accessed in the bar at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure if you're asking a question to tell us your name, your affiliation, and which panelist you would like to direct your question to, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those questions at the end of the session as we can. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available after the fact on the ICAP website. So many thanks again to all who have joined. I'd like to start off with introducing my colleague, Lena Lee. Lena is a senior manager at the ICAP Secretariat with more than 10 years of career experience in carbon markets, low emissions development, and climate and foreign policy. She oversees political outreach, technical dialogue, and capacity building activities at ICAP with a focus on China and the wider Asia Pacific region. Lena, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Emma. Let me share my screen. You guys can see it. Yeah, perfect. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to give you an overview of the key findings of the ICAP Status Report 2021. Before I move into the content of my presentation, I first wanted to introduce to any one of you who has joined us for the first time. ICAP International Carbon Action Partnership is an international forum which has been founded back in 2007 and has grown into a major forum for national and subnational governments who are developing or who is operating or are developing their emission trading system to really share best practices and also exchange on key design and implementation topics. We also offer a wide range of capacity building activities for different jurisdictions that are in the early stage of exploring emissions trading. And in that context, I am also more than happy that my focus region, and which is also the focus of this webinar, is Asia Pacific. And as I will mention later on, that it's really a region that emission trading is taking up a lot of momentum, as well as the ambition towards a deep decarbonized future. I also wanted to congratulate my colleagues who worked really hard at the ICAP Secretariat to put this annual flagship report together. And really, I think a lot of jurisdictions and experts have been using our report as like to go whenever they meet others preparing for meetings and wanted to learn more about different systems and how they look. Within the report, you will see detailed fact sheets of all the systems that is under consideration, under development or operational. You will also see signed articles from public sector representatives and experts that really provide some insights into their own systems. And of course, a lot of infographics that showcase the key figures and facts about emission trading around the world. And that leads to me my last brief note before the content side is really a huge thanks to all our members and observers and our network with experts who has contributed hugely to this edition of the status report. Without their contribution, I think we will not be able to have such a comprehensive and a very true picture of all the systems around the world. And with that, I'm moving to My second slide, this is one of the most quoted used ICAP knowledge product. It's a world map emissions trading, and now we are at the beginning of 2021. You can see that basically emission trading has spread across the different continents. Starting from the left side of this map, we see in the past 12 months, the subnational systems continue to develop in the North American context, and we also see the emergence of a new initiative covering transport sector. And in the Latin American region, we see the first year of the compliant of the pilot phase of the Mexican national ETS, and Colombia is also working very hard to also progress their own national emission trading development. And move a bit to the other side of the map, you see the EU ETS continuously to really lead their way ahead by further fine-tune the mechanism design. And also it was the 2020 was a year where EU ETS finally operational. They are linking with Switzerland. We congratulate both jurisdictions on that endeavor. And you also see emerging systems in the broader area next to the European Union. We also, as I highlighted already earlier, see a great development of emission trading in Asia. As my next slide will also show, the biggest kind of new systems in the year 2021 are Chinese national emission trading alongside two other systems, the national ETS of Germany and the national ETS of Britain. And in Southeast Asia, we see that a number of countries are preparing legislative regulative process, such as Vietnam, Indonesia, for launching their own emissions trading within a couple of years. Also regarding the coverage of the emission trading, given the broader picture which I outlined in the previous slide, might not be very surprising to see that since the 2005, when EU ETS was launched as the first major international ETS around the world, when this ETS was covered around has covered around 5% of the global emission trading, with the national emission trading of China, among other systems, coming on board at the beginning of 2021. Now we see that the emission trading as a policy instrument covers 16% of the global GG emissions. And looking to the future, we also believe that the policy instrument is a very important part of the jurisdiction's endeavor towards net zero. And that also linked me to the other elements which I didn't mention in the previous slide, which is the other two major East Asia countries, both Korea and Japan, also announced last year their carbon neutrality target, and they are in the process of either further align their emission trading, in the case of South Korea, to this long-term target, and in the case of Japan, they are exploring how carbon pricing could help to reach this policy target. So a lot of momentum again in the Asia region, and we're looking forward to hear some of them from the panelists today as well. As a ETS handbook, we also look at how price has developed. We all know that we could not talk anything about 2020 without mentioning the pandemic. Indeed, you have seen that at the beginning of the pandemic, especially between last March, April, and May, major existing emission trading did see price downward pressure from the shutdown of economic activities, but the price development really show the system's resilience, because the price has really quickly picked up. And by end of the year, you can see in the second map, especially where we benchmark year beginning as 100. So you can see that most of the system actually recover to the year start level or even higher. that we believe were contributed by two major factors. One is the different system has taken up major activities to fine-tune and develop their market stability mechanisms, and this has proven to be functioning. And second, which is perhaps even more important, is that all the major jurisdictions has also shown commitment to ambitious middle to long-term targets, and this bring in a lot of market confidence to the market participants and ensure that the price signal is robust and also the overall system is resilient to this huge external shock. And this actually has built in a lot of trust and confidence of the policymakers into emission trading. And looking forward, as I said, as more and more jurisdictions not only committing to their pathways towards net zero, but making out policies and instruments to achieve this, we believe that emission trading will continue to expand globally and will continue to play a more and more important role in this global pathway towards net zero targets. My very last slide, and I hope really just to provide you a snapshot of different tools and different knowledge products that ICAP has provided you alongside the report. We hope that you could make use of them. I know a lot of them are already familiar to you. If not, please check our website. And very last 2 points is we do have 2 major reports coming up. And one is a report called ETS Handbook, which ICAP Secretariat has worked closely with our partner, the World Bank Partnership for Market Readiness, World Bank PMR. We are going to launch it in the coming months. The second edition of this handbook that outlines the key steps that any jurisdiction need to take and key experience in developing an ETS. And the second report I want to mention is Net Zero and ETS report, which is a technical working group under ICAP, and we will map out different options how ETS and negative emission technologies market could interact and go along with each other, and what are the pros and cons. And these 2 reports will be coming up in the coming months. And please do follow us on Twitter, check our website, sign up the newsletter so that you do get notice about them and various opportunities to interact with experts involved in these reports in the coming months. And with that, I hand over the floor back to Emma, and looking forward to today's panel discussion.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Lena, and for giving the overview of our products and the status report. Before we dive into our presenters, we wanted to get a sense of who's with us today. So we're going to do a quick Mentimeter poll to get a sense of who's in the audience, and we'll be launching that momentarily. What you're going to see is this pop up on your screen. There we are. And at the top, you'll find a code. So if you go to menti.com and use the code, it's about to be generated at the top of the screen there. Pop that code into the website and mark for us on the map that pops up on the screen where you're located. We'd love to have a sense of where folks are tuning in from today. Okay, we have some folks staying up late in Australia. Appreciate having you on the call. Thanks so much for being with us. Okay, great to see that we have some nice diversity across Europe and Asia Pacific. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Let's go now to our next Mentimeter slide. We'd love to get a sense of your country, if your country of residence has an ETS, and this can be national or subnational. or supranational, I should say as well. Okay, well, for those who aren't sure if their country of residence has an ETS, I can definitely direct you to the ICAP website, and the ETS map would be a good way to get a sense if your country is on it and if it has a ETS currently. Okay, great to see we have quite a few folks in jurisdictions with ETSs on the call, so familiar with the mechanism. All right, with that, I'll ask my colleagues to close the Mentimeter, and I will turn the floor over to Frederic Brenger from France. Frederic is the Deputy Head of the Carbon Market Unit at the Ministry of Ecological and Inclusive Transition of France. He's France's focal point for ICAP, and he works on EU ETS design and climate policies in the aviation sector. Frederic, we're thrilled to have you with us. The floor is yours. Frederic, are you able to begin your presentation?
Yes, sorry, my computer froze. I'm gonna restart the sharing. It doesn't work, does it?
Unfortunately not. Perhaps we can share your presentation for you instead if your computer's freezing.
If it's possible, I'm sorry.
No problem. Let's see if we can get share your presentation for you. Give us just 1 second. Okay, perfect.
Okay, so you can go directly to the following slide. So France is part of the EU ETS, so it's a supranational ETS. We are part, and it concerns the emissions of industry, power, and intra-EU aviation. And the rest of the emissions are covered by a different EU regulation called the effort sharing regulation. For France, one of the particularities is that most of the emissions are covered by non-ETS, I would say. It's only 25% of the national emissions that are covered by the ETS. The targets of France are carbon neutrality by 2050 and in 2030 a 40% emission reduction compared to 1990. So this is enshrined in national law, and we also have 5 years carbon budget, ensuring we are going on the good trajectory. And this is what you can see in the chart with the share of ETS and non-ETS emissions in this carbon budget. Now, the next slide, please. So I will talk after about the ETS. For the non-ETS part, there is a sort of carbon tax in France, which is not technically legally a carbon tax, but it's a computation of the energy tax, which has a carbon price in it. On the chart, you can see the different trajectories. So the initial trajectory was going to 100 euro per ton of CO2 in 2030. This trajectory was increased by Nicolas Hulot in 2017, and there were after protestation and opposition to this carbon tax, which led to the frozen of the increase of this carbon tax. So it's still there, but it's frozen at around 44 euro per ton of CO2, which is now still higher than the EU ETS, but not by so much as the ETS is increasing. And it represents 25% of energy taxes and 8 billion euros, so it's quite significant. Next slide, please. So now we'll give a few words on the EU ETS. So as France, we are part of the discussion, but it's a EU mechanism. What is very noticeable is the increase of the carbon price quite recently, with a price higher than 40 euros and staying above this threshold for the past 3 weeks. At this moment, we don't know yet the 2020 emissions because they will be released tomorrow and the following days, following weeks. What we have in the non-official and analyst estimation is that the order of magnitude of the decrease percent in 2020 versus 2019, which was also a big decrease in 2019. And that the EU ETS is going to go through a big revision starting this year in the Fit for 55 package presented by the Commission in June 2021, part of the EU Green Deal. What we can expect from this revision is a significant cap decrease of the EU ETS. The order of magnitude would be around 65% in 2030 compared to 43% at the moment. There is going to be a lot of discussion about extending the EU ETS to new sectors, mostly for shipping. But it's also possible that the Commission will present extension to transport and building. And there's going to be also a proposition of carbon border adjustment for the industrial sectors at risk of carbon leakage. Next slide, please. Going back on the national side, a few words on the recovery plan. So it was important for France to build back better and greener, and the recovery plan was approved last year of 100 billion euros, and 30% is earmarked for climate. And for this climate part, one part is very related to the EU ETS because it's different calls for projects for a package called the Industry Decarbonization Program. There is a bit more than 1 billion euros in 2020 up to 2022 to facilitate the decarbonization transition of the EU industry. And we started to have the first winners of the call for project that you can see on the map. You cannot read the names, but it's just to see that it's covering the entire French territory. And so far, so it's just the beginning, but there are about 50 projects and about half a ton of CO2 reduced every year in the projects. Next slide, please. And on the climate agenda, what is very big at the moment in France is the discussions of a new climate law called the Climate and Resilience Law. And it's a law that originated from a political experiment, which is called the Climate Citizens Convention, which was 150 random citizens, like a survey, but they were hired to work on climate propositions, and they met on numerous occasions, and there was a big support and big budget for this project. And they presented a report last year in June with 149 propositions. Then the government adapted these propositions to make a project of law. And at the moment, there are discussions at the parliament amending and transforming the original government project. And I list just a few propositions of this law. So one related to carbon market in a way is that domestic flights could have to compensate their emission on a compulsory basis. There are also instruments on information like a carbon score for products, like you can have for food, but in the carbon part. A lot of discussions on regulation of ads. There is also proposition to have low carbon emissions in city centers to ban certain types of cars. to ban also certain types of buildings if they are really energy inefficient from renting, and also target in artificialization reduction to have artificialization by the next 10 years. And I think that's all for me. Yeah.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Frederick, and for the really useful information. I'd like to pose one follow-up question. You spoke about France's goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, and we're seeing quite a bit of traction with climate neutral goals around the world, as Lena was highlighting. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the role of the EU ETS is for France specifically in reaching that target.
So in France, the carbon neutrality in 2050, it's actually a double target, because there is a carbon neutrality target, but there is also an absolute emissions target, basically a division by 6 or 7 compared to the reference. And what we envision in the future is that we mostly have emissions from agriculture and just very few in industry. And it's compensated by mostly natural sinks, and at this time quite a few CCS, but the role of the ETS will be key to ensure decarbonization, total decarbonization at least of the power sector, and also to promote decarbonization of the industry. It will need to be amended to better incentivize CCS and carbon sequestration in general, because for now there is an incentive, but not to its full potential. But the EU ETS will make sure that the emissions are decreased alongside this target, but it will not be the only instrument. It will need to be complemented by many instruments, especially for transport and buildings.
Okay, thanks for digging into that. And I think we'll probably come back with a couple more questions in the Q&A. I'll now move the floor over to Hannah Lewis. Hannah is the head of carbon pricing negotiations at the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. She has over 10 years experience working on climate change policy, including low carbon heat, the future of the UK gas network, and since 2016, the UK emissions trading policy. She previously worked as energy and climate attaché with the UK Foreign Office in Moscow and in gas trading support at Equinor. Hannah, we're thrilled to have you with us here today, and the floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. So firstly, I just wanted to say thank you very much to ICAP for inviting us to speak today, and also many congratulations on publication of the 2021 status report, which is an incredibly valuable resource to all of us. So in my presentation, I just wanted to cover 3 things. So firstly, a brief bit of context on the situation in the UK. And secondly, to talk a bit more about the UK ETS implementation and design features. And then finally, to look ahead a little bit about how the system may evolve going forward. So if we can maybe move on to the first slide, I'll just talk a little bit about the context in the UK. I think the first thing really to say that underpins everything that we're doing on climate is in 2019, we have now legislated for a 2050 net zero goal in the UK. We also have committed to NDC under the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions by 68% by 2030. There's a few sort of key documents that have been published over the last 6 months that are worth mentioning. So building on the UK's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, last year, the UK government published an energy white paper looking at how to transform the wider energy system. And then just last month, the UK has also published its first ever net zero strategy for industry. So again, looking at how industry can decarbonize in line with net zero and still remain competitive. So it's in this context that the UK has now launched a UK emissions trading scheme that came into force at the beginning of this year to replace the UK's participation in the EU ETS. And in combination with other policy levers, it's very much the intention that the UK ETS will be a core tool in enabling the delivery of that net zero goal. So if we can just move on to the next slide. I just wanted to talk briefly about what progress had already been made in the UK. And so if we look at the graph on the right, it really just demonstrates how over the last 30 years, the UK has increased its GDP and also reduced emissions quite considerably at the same time. So really just demonstrating that economic growth and emission reduction can happen in parallel. Largely a lot of this emission reduction was driven by progress in the power sector in the UK, as the first graph demonstrates that emissions for power have decreased quite substantially over the last 10 years by over 70%, thanks to sort of the role phasing out use of coal and electricity generation, moving to more renewable sources of energy, and having a strong carbon price signal has been really important in driving this transition. That has been thanks to both the role of the EU ETS and also the carbon price support in the UK, which is an additional tax on fuel for electricity generation. Perhaps if we move on now to the next slide. So to talk more specifically about the UK emission trading scheme. So last year we did consult on different options for the future of carbon pricing in the UK as we have left the EU ETS. And the decision was made to implement a UK emission trading scheme. The scheme has now gone live. It went live at the beginning of this year. So participants that are captured must monitor, report on their emissions from the 1st of January. So the main legislation for the scheme, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Order 2020, was laid last year. This includes the main provisions for the scheme in terms of the design, the scope, cap, and so on. And then there has also been subsequent legislation in terms of the auctioning regulations, which set out the rules for auctioning and also price management mechanisms. The UK ETS auction calendar has now been published. Auctions will begin on the 19th of May and will occur more or less every 2 weeks. The registry has now been developed and will be live for registration in the spring, and UK allocation tables will also be published as soon as possible with the aim that free allocation can be issued in Q2. We can move on now, and I'll just say a little bit about the key design features. So in terms of the design, I think priorities for the UK were very much about having an ambitious system that would continue to have a strong price signal, but also really ensuring a smooth transition for UK participants who have moved from participation in the EU ETS into the UK ETS. And so because of this, very much a large number of the design features are in the image of the EU ETS. So it will probably be quite familiar to many people. So key things to note. So the cap, we had aimed to make our cap more ambitious from the offset. So it has initially been set at 5% lower than what would have been the UK's expected share of the EU ETS cap for phase 4. And the intention is that this will then be aligned with net zero in the early years of the scheme. In terms of the scope, so the UK ETS will cover power, heavy industry and aviation, and that will include both domestic flights and flights between the UK and the EEA. Auctioning will continue to be the main means for distributing allowances, and there will also be a secondary market to trade. And then on free allocation, so as with many systems to safeguard against competitiveness risks and the risk of carbon leakage, a proportion of allowances will still be allocated for free to participants. And this will be based on benchmarks and also will aim to target those sectors that are most at risk of carbon leakage. And there also will continue to be a sort of simplified policy for small emitters and then a robust measuring reporting and verification requirements. I'd also note that just due to the fact that, of course, emission trading schemes naturally evolve and adapt over time, it is very useful to have structured phases. So our system will run in phases. The first phase will be from 2021 to 2030. And if we move on to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit more specifically about price management, particularly in the theme of sort of how to ensure short-term resilience. And I think, having a new system, this is particularly really important for us to make sure that the system gets off to a good start. So one of the most important things are, having these features that are there to support the system in the early years. And to do this, we have two main mechanisms. The first one is really to guard against the risk of excessively low prices. So we have introduced an auction reserve price. The aim is to give just a minimum level of price certainty during the early stages. So there will be a price of £22. And this provides essentially a floor in auctions. So bids below that level would not be accepted. But the intention is very much that this would just be a transitional measure to protect against low prices in the early years of the scheme. Secondly, and to sort of protect against the opposite risk of very, very high volatile price spikes, we have introduced a cost containment mechanism. And for the early years of the scheme, it will be a much more reactive mechanism. So it will have lower time and price triggers for actually being able to utilize this mechanism. And it's really a route for government intervention in a very specific set of circumstances. And if triggered, it would enable the option, for example, for the government to introduce more allowances into auctions, either through redistributing auction allowances for the year, bringing forward allowances from following years, as an example. So as I said, these mechanisms are really intended to be short term. However, we will be considering whether in the longer term, we also need to have a supply adjustment mechanism to ensure a more sort of sustainable approach to managing the supply demand balance. I think we can move on now, and I'll talk a little bit about looking ahead. So I think, as I mentioned, we've established this scheme very much in the image of the EU ETS to support a smooth transition. But once it is established, the aim is very much to evolve and develop the scheme, and also to really use it to help deliver our net zero goals, and make sure it is tailored to the UK context. So in that vein, this year we are planning a number of targeted reviews. So firstly, to mention on net zero consistent cap. So last year we received advice from the UK Committee on Climate Change regarding the sixth carbon budget. And following this, we will be consulting later this year on how we can align our cap and trajectory to net zero. The aim is that we would then implement any changes by 2023, hopefully, but no later than January 2024. So secondly, free allocation. So initially, free allocation in the UK ETS uses essentially the same methodology as that under the EU ETS, but also in the context of net zero, we will be considering whether that approach is still appropriate and reviewing free allocation measures to make sure they remain fair and equitable, as we are reducing the cap in line with net zero. We've recently launched a call for evidence on this as well, just to help inform that review. And then I think the third thing I'd mention is scope. So we very much recognise there is a case for exploring the possibility of including other sectors in the UK ETS. At the moment, it covers 1/3 of UK emissions, but we will be considering whether any other sectors could be captured, and we've committed to exploring options there. And then finally, I would just note that also on aviation, there will be a review to determine how the UK ETS can most effectively work and interact with the international scheme on aviation, so with CORSIA. I think we can move on now just to my final slide.
Hannah, I just want to flag we are over the allotted 8 minutes, so if you can go as quick as possible to ensure we get all the presenters on, that would be great.
I'm so sorry. Well, so this is just the final thing to note is that, of course, international cooperation is going to be really key for us. And also to note very quickly that one area we are interested to explore is the principle of linking emission trading systems, where we very much recognize there could be an opportunity there. And so I'll wrap up there. Apologies, I went over, and thank you so much again.
Not a problem. Thank you for the very informative presentation. We appreciate it. I think, Hannah, I will save my question that I had for you until the end, just so we can allow everybody else to present. But I think we'll have quite a bit of discussion as there's interest in this new system that's come online. So with that, I'll move on to our speaker from Indonesia, Mr. Didi Gardera. Dida is Assistant Deputy for Environmental Conservation at the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. He spent most of his career at the Ministry of Environment, later the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. He has many experiences in climate change, international fora as a speaker, and is Indonesia's lead negotiator for the UNFCCC meetings. He's received his bachelor's in environmental engineering from Bandung Institute of Technology and a master's of science and social planning from the London School of Economics. Dida, we're thrilled to have you here with us today, and the floor is yours. Dida, are you able to share your slides?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you able to share your slides, or would you like us to put them up for you?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for ICAP for inviting me to share Indonesia experience in developing emission trading system. About 2 weeks ago, we just launched the emission trading system for piloting phase. And thanks, I saw the report of ICAP that Indonesia have a progress from consideration now in the phase of under development. Next slide, please. Yeah, we were preparing this ETS a long time ago, but intensively we start preparing for carbon pricing mechanism, particularly emission trading system since 2017, particularly with the support of Partnership for Market Readiness Program. We have developed the MRV system, and also we have emission profile from 2 sectors, energy and industry. And we are doing some capacity building, and also in the regulation. Right now, we are in the phase of finalizing this regulation. Yeah, actually, we plan to finalize last year's, but since the situation is not conducive for all of us, so hopefully within this first semester of this year will be finalized. Next slide. Yeah, we have already the government regulations. Right now we are, as I said before, we are finalizing the more technical regulation, and we have already identified that in power sectors and some of the high consumption of energy in the industrial sectors such as cement, fertilizers, and pulp and paper have a huge potential to reduce emission. Is about 58% million ton of carbon dioxide, or about 18% to our NDC's targets. Some challenges in ETS development is implementing regulation for emission cap. We still ongoing. Capacity building, since the in the government staff, we are always have a movement rotation, so we have to have a continuous capacity building. We have already market infrastructure such as registry system, but of course needs some improvement, and it is about the tricky ones to set the cap. We want to set the cap in the ideal condition, but of course there is always some consensus among the stakeholders. Next slide. Yeah, in the carbon pricing policy development, we will regulate all the related aspects or activities for both domestic carbon trading, and also we prepare if the Article 6 of Paris Agreement will be agreed by this year, hopefully, so we can have a capacity to engage with this international carbon trading. We have 5 sectoral scope: energy, waste, forestry, agriculture, and industrial, and the process of industry. Next slide, final slide. Yeah, we just, as I mentioned, we just launched 2 weeks ago the pilot of ETS in voluntary basis. ETS pilot in the power generation sector has been launched, yeah, exactly in the 18 March 2021. There are 3 ministers attending this launch. My Minister of Economic Affairs, Energy and Mineral Resources, and Environment and Forestry. This voluntary pilot is to educate all the stakeholders to familiarize with the carbon pricing instrument. And the current pilot scope is called power plants above 100 megawatts, covering more than 75% of greenhouse gases emission from the power generation sectors. And is about 80 industry involved in this program. Every 1 year we will evaluate the progress of this power plant emission, and will be end for this year in August 2021. Because this is a voluntary basis, so we will use the incentive mechanism, so the best performer will get the award from the government. And hopefully within 2 or 3 years, we will have the formal ETS or regulated ETS, because in our regulation, we have to conduct the ETS before 2024. So I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dita, and congratulations on the launch of the pilot recently. A quick follow-up question to you. Why did you decide to go the route of launching a sort of a pilot first before doing the full implementation of the system? What was the sort of logic behind this? And does it how does it sort of feed into the ETS launch?
Yeah, initially we will try to finish the regulation first, but because the situation of pandemic. So and the discussion is have been developed, and we are agreed that it's better we do the pilot first, and in this pilot, the experience of piloting this ITS will enrich the the regulation, because we have no experience. So I think we do iteration approach. Hopefully, yeah, with this experience, we can find the positive aspect and what should be improved. So I think we do this pilot first. We set the longest phase of pilot is 3 years, but if in 1 year we can find the right way, the number of cap and the MRV already in place, and so on and so forth. So perhaps yeah, and regulation already in place. So perhaps within 1 or 2 years we can implement the regulated way.
Okay, thanks for that detail there. And I think we have some definite questions from the audience that want to get further into discussion. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A to dive a little bit deeper. So then I'll move to our final presenter, Kian. Kian is a Deputy General Manager at Sinocarbon, the leading climate policy and green development consultant in China. He's an ETS specialist and recognized expert on energy, climate policy, and green development. And he has extensive experience in supporting ETS design and operation, both at the pilot and national level in China. We're thrilled he could be here with us today. Kian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emma, and hi, colleagues, everybody. I should say good afternoon or good morning. Maybe I can also share the screen on my own, or somebody is helping me to control the. Yeah, I will share the screen. So. Yes, okay, now it works. So I think the first thing I would like to report to colleagues is about the updated timeline for the year of 2021, which I think it's everybody's has been long expecting what will be the launch, or what will be the time for the compliance of the Chinese national emission trading system. And since last year, we have announced a very milestone policy about China will, achieve peaking its CO2 emissions before 2030 and try to build a carbon neutral society before 2060. I think, climate change policies has been speeded up, and also the building of the national emission trading systems has been gaining new political momentum, and also we can see, obviously, we have been, everything has been speeding up. And what has been certain, of course, I would like to say that now what it has been certain is that there is a very, specific timeline. For example, we are going to have reporting of the CO2 emissions for the power sector, for the generators, power generators. They are required to finish reporting through an online electronic reporting system by April 30th, and by September 30th, all the other sectors, which I will show you the table about what kind of sectors is not covered temporarily, but they are required to report and verify the emissions. So the reporting line has been very clear that the generators will have to finish reporting by April 30, and they need to finish verification. All the reporting need to be verified, and which means that the government will have verified reporting and verified data for the generators for the year of 2019 and 2020. So it will be, they were collecting the verified data for generators for the year of 19 and 20. And of course, the rest is not for compliance. So they're not, the timeline has been pushed to December. But obviously the timeline is aiming for trading to be started. And you can see that after the June 30th, the provinces will submit the final list of covered entities under the national ETS. So by that time, we will have a final list of who will be, in the national carbon market as the first players of the market. And the government will finish the final allocation for the year of 19 and 20. It's a 2-year allocation by September 30th. And they need to finish compliance for the past 2 years. So it will be the compliance for 2 years by December 30th. So this is a timeline announced by the government just 3 days ago. So it's just a very new timeline. And I have to say that before we have the launch of the national ETS, there will be, of course, a number of things that we are still under preparation. For example, the first thing is that the data for 19 and 2020, I think it will be for 2 years data. So we need to have verified the data, and they are working on the data, and the verification has already started. And of course, we need to have a allocation finalized based on the verified data. But at the same time, we are preparing for the registry and also the exchange platforms, and these are under preparation, and they will be ready, by June, end of the June. They are required to be ready by the end of the June. And but one of the uncertain thing is that the national higher level national ETS regulation, which will be announced by a higher government body with the State Council, is still under discussion. And the government recently have released a draft regulation for public opinion. Just, of course, 2 days ago, they have released it for public opinion. Of course, people is anticipating that this regulation will enter into force by the end of the year or next year, hopefully. So who will be covered under the ETS is, I think it's quite now clear, is the power generation, the power generators. So the grid has been removed from the list. So if you look at the table, the table reflecting the status of last year, but the latest news is that the grid has been removed. So only generation and cogeneration, which is heat and power generation, will be entered into the emission trading for the first phase. And the rest of these sectors, they are all required to report and verify the emission data. But timeline for the inclusion of these other sectors is not clear. We need to work out the allocation methodologies. We need to work out the feasibilities. So it could be take 1 or 2 years, more years, to have more sectors to be on board. But obviously that the power generation sector is the first one, and this will be the first compliance year. And next year they will have a second compliance. And there will be, we have been calculated that there will be 2,245 power generators, which will be included into the national emission trading systems. And if you look at the spread of these generators across the country, of course, that the Shandong province is we have 338 generators. But if we look at Hainan, or if we look at Qinghai, they have less of the generators. So it could be very diverse. I think in China, some of the provinces are very, power generation intensively located. In particular, the coal-fired power generators intensive located. But some of the other rest of the provinces, they have fewer of these installations. But these emissions, they account for roughly 40% of the national total CO2 emissions, which could be roughly 4 billion tons of allowances. But we need to make sure that after the allocation, we will see that whether it will be 4 billion or over 3 billion CO2 emissions. But roughly it could be 3.5 billion, I would say. But and the cap setting is we still have the bottom-up approach, which means that in the beginning phase, in the early phase, all the allocation on the installations, they add up to the provincial cap, and the provincial cap add up to a national cap, and we don't have predetermined national cap. But if we look at the draft national regulation, since we are going to have a peaking of national emission trading system, peaking of the national CO2 emissions, it is likely that in the future, the cap will be linked to the national overall emission cap. So in the future, it is likely, this will be closely linked to the overall national cap. But so far, I think to make things easier and we can just move forward, we just started with a bottom-up approach. And the question about how the ETS is designed to drive emission abatement and support market resilience, because something is not still certain. In particular, the national regulation is not certain. And if we look at the draft regulation, there's no market stability reserve, in the regulation. And maybe some people will propose to keep a national reserve, and the regulations still have the chance to change. But so far, we don't have, we cannot see in the regulation they don't have a reserve. But they proposed a national green fund. The fund comes from the money of auctioning of the allocation in the future. So we do have an auctioning system anticipated in the future if we look at the regulation. But still, everything is pending. But the policymakers obviously is looking at the EU's experiences, is collecting money from the auctioning and put the money into a national green fund to invest into the green technologies and green finance. But if we look at the allocation methodologies, that is in the beginning, of course, all the allowances will go for free, and they will be by benchmark allocation, benchmark-based allocation. But the thing is that we can see that one of the difference from the Chinese allocation to the EU is that we have a pre-allocation and also a final allocation. So the allocation goes, with two steps, because the allocation is based on the actual production. It is not based on ex-ante setting of the capacities. For example, the EU is that based on the historically determined capacity and power generation, you have a benchmark of the history emission allowances, and every year you just go for a declining factor and you decline the allocation. And the EU's model is that it does not take into account the annual emission status of annual emission and also annual capacity of generation. So how much electricity has been generated does not reflect the allowance. So that's why you need a market reserve, stability reserve, to make sure that economic going down will not affect the allowance. So in China is that we just make sure that the allowance goes with the economic performance. So if you have a good economy, the generators is put more capacities and they produce more electricity, they will get more allowances. If they produce less, they will get less allowances. So, but this allocation needs that we need to have a final verified data. And we cannot just give the allowances for the year of 2021, for example, because we don't have the final verified data for this year. So we need to have a final allocation for the year of 2021 in 2022. So which means that we need to have a more complex allocation process and system. But the basis for the allocation is similar to EU, is that we need, the formula is that we are, the basic units of the allocation is based on, for example, the allowances of electricity supply and also allowances for heating supply. And each of the generators, for example, the electricity supply is that the amount of the electricity you produced multiplied by the benchmark and also multiplied by some correction factors, which is to make sure that to some minor adjustment to make sure that different power companies will have a fair competition.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're running short on time. Can I ask you to wrap up the presentation just so we can get to some of the questions that folks have posed in the chat?
Okay.
It would be great.
Okay. So these are the benchmarks for the power generators. So we are, of course, these will be reviewed after 1 or 2 years, and they will be much more stringent in the future. And I think lastly is that I think that we what is defined in the national regulation is that the ETS obviously is defined as a long-term policy tool to drive CO2 emissions down and build a green economy and make sure that the green economy transition happens, by the price signal. But to make a stable price signal, we need still facing a number of challenges in the future. For example, because we have a very strong national policy about making sure the peaking of CO2 emissions. So we're also going to announce very robust renewable energy target, energy efficiency target, and also, some of the industry policies to make sure the emissions were going down. So when we define the ETS allocation methodologies and also the ETS allowance benchmarks, we need to make sure that they go, compatible with each other, not compete with each other, so that we will make sure that the ETS is, have a robust carbon price to price, the price signal will be stable. So this is, I think we need to make sure, and we need to, one of the points that we need to observe, and one of the things that we are very, highly, alert what will happen in the coming, future years. So let's see that what will happen after the start of the trading. With this, I think I will finish my introduction, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken, for that input. And thank you to everyone who's been submitting questions, to our panelists. Thank you to our panelists for their presentations. I'd like to ask all our panelists to turn on their cameras now, and we'll stop sharing the screen and dig right into the questions we've been getting through the Q&A. Thanks, everybody, for your engagement. I think I'd like to pose the first question to Hannah, just because we didn't get a chance to do a question earlier on. And there, I think we'd like to get a sense of, first, you launched this system in the midst of a pandemic, and where we saw a lot of volatility in carbon markets at the start of the pandemic, and then on average prices have rebounded. And what were some of the key lessons that you learned or employed from other systems from previous economic recessions as you were designing this system? Were there any sort of key takeaways that you were able to make use of from other ETSs?
Hi, yes, very, very happy to come in on this. And yes, I think it's absolutely the case that it was a very unusual context, obviously, in many ways, to be implementing a new system, both having the context of the pandemic and also, I guess, for the UK, moving from being part of one very well-established emission trading system to starting a new system from scratch. And I think for me, maybe one of the takeaways is that the mechanisms that you need maybe for an early system are not the same as the sort of mechanisms that you would have in a well-established system. And I think price management is a really good example of this. And certainly, I think we did look at other ETSs worldwide. And I think this is why, for example, we decided to have a auction reserve price for the first couple of years, more responsive cost containment mechanism to protect against those added risks and uncertainty around whether, you know, they could be particularly low price or very, very high price, and to make sure we can protect against that. And also is perhaps the reason why our system does, although it looks like the EU ETS in many ways, one of the areas where it is different is on price management. And we haven't got a tool that is sort of the same as the market stability reserve, for example, because that is maybe addressing a slightly different problem where you have an established system and you have already a build-up of surplus allowances.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thanks for going into that a little bit further. I'd like to now pose a question to Frederick. One of the sort of key points of discussion in for the EU ETS at the moment and the European community is a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I would be curious from France's perspective how such a mechanism may align with upcoming revisions to the EU ETS.
So how it may align with the revision? Do you mean like the timing?
Yeah, how will these sorts of discussions come to sort of fruition with the revision of the EU ETS, and what does that sort of mean for France specifically as a EU ETS country, a country covered by the EU ETS, I should say?
Oh yeah, first one important aspect is that the Commission will propose both the ETS revision and the CBAM in the same package, legislative package, the 55 package in June. So we will have the discussions in parallel between ETS revision and CBAM. However, there is an additional pressure on CBAM because there was an agreement at the EU Council to try to implement it by 2023, which is very soon for such a big change. So this might diverge in this sense, but a way to reconcile both would be to implement in 2023 only a pilot carbon border adjustment, this instrument must be designed in parallel with the ETS because there's so much interaction, for example, with the free allocation. If there is a free allocation phase out and at what pace, it influences the design of the carbon border adjustment.
Okay, so all eyes turning to later in the year when all of this will be a little bit clearer for everyone. Thank you for that. Dita, I'd like to turn to you. We have a question from Daniel Nachtigal, and he's asking in the implementation of this voluntary ETS that recently launched for Indonesia, was there any pushback from stakeholders on that implementation due to COVID-19 and the effects to the economy? And if so, how did you address these concerns as you move forward with the implementation? Dita, I think you're muted, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for our question. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, of course, with this pandemic situation, all the stakeholders asking to postpone, and we already postponed, but they want to make longer. But yeah, at first, we all the ministers should be in one solid team. And fortunately, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources have a very high commitment for doing this pilot. And then we conduct this series of meeting, discussion with all stakeholders. And yeah, we try to convince them that the ETS will give a benefit for their business. And one of the key aspect that we ask them to plan for the future when the cleaner energy is an inevitable option and promising. And finally, they want to engage. Of course, we have some consensus. They asking with the very loose cap, and then year by year will be strengthen the cap until the cap is in the ideal number. So yeah, it's very challenging, but yeah, fortunately we can conduct this ETS.
Yeah, well, I mean, kudos to you for launching that amidst a pandemic, and exciting to see it get off the ground. Kian, I'd like to turn to you with a question. We've had, until the launch of the national ETS, a lot of the focus has been on China's regional pilots, the 8 different pilots across the country. And I'm curious if you could articulate for us how the sectors currently covered by the regional pilots will be incorporated into the national ETS, given that power sector is covered in both. How does the national government anticipate this transition going?
Yeah, it's very clear that for those power generators, which will be covered under the national ETS, they will just jump out of the regional ETS and join in the national ETS. So they will no longer operate under the regional ETS. So the transition is that, there will be a clear year that once you have decided to join the national ETS, you will just, leave the regional. So it is decided already. So, but the rest is they just keep running and until that all of these regional ETS, they like to expand the coverage, and they have interest to continue the operation of the regional ETS.
So then it could be something to watch to see if sector coverage is going to be happening, that expansion is going to be happening to the national ETS, or instead through the various regional ones.
Yes, correct.
Okay, definitely something worth keeping an eye on then. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
I think I'd like to go to a cross-panel question to everyone. Some of us have mentioned this, but with the focus so much on net zero at the moment, from the perspective of your ETSs, what do the role of offsets play in achieving that net zero target? And is it possible, from your opinion, to achieve that target without offsets? Happy to, if anyone wants to raise a hand, to let me know who might have an answer ready, or who would like to wait a little bit. Frederick, please.
Yes, so if I'm correct, the EU NDC doesn't include any offsets. The plan is to achieve net zero without any offsets. But in the current NDC, the role of international aviation and shipping is not also so clear. So if the EU decides to take into account all emissions, including international emissions, it might be more difficult to achieve without offset. But there is such a passive, I would say, a history of offset in the EU ETS that it's quite unlikely, in my opinion, that they will be reintroduced very soon in the system because it created a lot of issues. What is also unclear in the net zero target is, I think the debate will be the share between natural sinks and CCS, and whether or not we will have just a net zero target or a dual target with net zero and maybe 80% or 90% decrease. But the issue with offset is really about additionality and the interaction with Article 6 and different NDCs. So there will be a role for natural sinks and the LULUCF sector, but offset Per se, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Qian, I see your hands raised. Do you want to comment on China?
Yeah, I think this is not quite clear, but I think the offset will definitely will play some role in the ETS system. So this is but we are still reviewing the CCER and how the CCER will reoperating, and what kind of rules for the offsetting on the of CCER under the national ETS is not clear. But if we move beyond the ETS, which the economy-wide carbon neutral society, I think that first is that we have not yet defined what is the scope, what is accounting guidelines for what is the carbon neutral, how you calculate what kind of emissions, all the economy-wide, every greenhouse gas emissions, or only CO2 emissions, or only CO2 emissions from the energy activities. So these have different implications, and the idea is not clear right now. The national government have not give clear guidelines what constitutes the carbon neutral. But obviously we can, whatever is the definition, I think that obviously we cannot, the whole society, we cannot go to net zero emission taking into consider the current technologies and also the technologies that we have been foresee. Maybe even by the year 2050 or 2060, we can go down the emissions to only 10%, or we reduce 90% or 80% of the emissions, but we still have 10% or 20% emissions that we cannot drive them down to in whatever. And then maybe offsets is one of the alternatives that we need to explore. For example, how the forestry carbon sinks can be calculated. Of course, they need to meet the accounting guidelines, but this is of course one of the options that we need to be clarified. And also the other is that if we use CCS, how CCS can be accounted, and how what is the technical guidelines for CCS to be accounted as emission reductions or removals from the economy. So these are also that we need to define. So I think offsets is something that I think we need to put it on the table, but still technical guidelines is not clear. So we need to make sure what it means, that the carbon neutral technically. So this is what we are discussing in China.
Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it speaks to Frederick's point as well of how, is it nature-based solutions only? Is it carbon capture and storage, CCS? What makes the most sense, and how will that be articulated? And I think as we work towards net zero, it's definitely something everybody will be continuing to watch closely. Hannah or Aditya, would you like to comment on this question? Hannah, please.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I think maybe we both came in at the same time there. Yes, just to come in briefly. So I think maybe firstly looking at the question of offsets from the ETS perspective, I think the first thing I would say is that we don't envisage the use of offsets in the UK ETS, at least not currently. And I think as Frederick said, there has been maybe a bit of a history there in the EU ETS where there are risks around use of offsets and ensuring environmental integrity, and if there aren't controls, there is a risk there of oversupply. However, I think we will be reviewing this and also thinking about it in the context of CORSIA implementation. But I think essentially any use of offsets would need to have sort of stringent standards and tests for acceptance, I think is being really key. In terms of net zero and whole economy, I mean, I absolutely agree with the other points that have been made. And I think in particular, one of the areas we are keen to look at is, and also in relation to the ETS, is how we can incentivize the deployment of greenhouse gas removal technologies. And I think that will be really key in delivering net zero. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Yeah, the technologies piece is going to be key in all of this, and how fast that can be developed in order to really meet those targets. Dita, please, I'm sorry you got cut off before, but we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Yeah, for our pilot of ETS, we have two options. First, of course, they have to mitigation actions, and then the second step, they can sell or buy for the carbon among the the stakeholders, the companies, and because we still have no clear picture yet about the market, so we develop the second option for offsetting. So if they above the cap, they can buy, but if not, they can do other mitigation action in this time related to the renewable energy sector. So they can do offset for compliance with the cap, or to win the award. About the zero neutral, yeah, we have some study, but still on this course, but not yet in the policy making process. But yeah, we have already planned in the certain years in the future.
Okay, so just so I make sure it's clear, in their voluntary pilot ETS at the moment, renewable energy projects are a potential offset opportunity for covered entities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Given that we have just a couple of minutes left, I'd like to do one more quick round and ask each of you for a key learning from this year. It's an unprecedented year to be managing, launching, designing an ETS. And I'd like to get a sense of, after doing this in a pandemic and having your eye on long-term climate goals, what's one key learning that you think would be good to share with our audience here? Dita, may I start with you? Because you were the last one to speak last time around.
Yeah, of course. The key learning that all the mitigation action is about the economy perspective. It gives efficiency, and if there is carbon pricing, it's kind of a bonus. So I think we just educate with through the stakeholders. So with that mindset, yeah, finally we can ask all the stakeholders to join the ETS. So I think there is no contradiction anymore between pro-climate development with economic growth perspective. That's the main lesson learned that we can get from this ETS development in Indonesia. Yeah,
an important message for everybody to keep in mind, and I think we're continuing to learn that, especially over the past year. Thank you for that. Kyun, can we get input from you? Key learning after launching the Chinese national ETS this year.
Yes, well, I think the most important thing is the political determination, high level, very at the top level political decision making, because we have been seeing so many that okay, there will be damage the economy, but actually, we have have a highly political consensus that building the ETS, building a carbon neutral society, is building a resilient and sustainable economy. There will be multiple opportunities. So we need to have a political determination about it. That's it. We need the way that we need to move forward, and whatever difficulties, but to look at the advantages and look at the opportunities that we are going to have. So that's the most important lesson, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking it as an opportunity to continue the momentum. Hannah, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, I mean, very much in a similar vein, actually. I think for me, it's certainly around the importance of sending a clear signal in terms of ambition. And I think having national targets, long-term goals is really, really essential. And in terms of setting an intention, and I think particularly perhaps in the UK context, having a net zero target in law has been really, really important in terms of sort of driving action across the whole piece on climate and energy. So
having that net zero target is the framework to work from. Yeah. Okay.
absolutely.
And Frederick, please, key learning this year after navigating the pandemic.
Yeah, what was mentioned before, that you can see an opportunity to build back greener, and with all the recovery plans must be earmarked for climate and to avoid carbon lock-ins. So it's a lot of public money coming in that must be spent wisely. And it was also important during the crisis, especially at the beginning, to be firm on our environmental objectives. There was suggestion by stakeholders at the very beginning to, for example, postpone compliance by 1 year. And it was retrospectively a very good idea to be firm and to maintain the credibility in the system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Showing that this environmental dedication is not wavering, it's here to stay. And it's important that we work together to uphold that in a way that can also enable economic growth and opportunity. Well, thank you everybody again for being here today. A large thank you to our panelists for the great inputs and the discussion. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and your good questions. The ICAP Secretariat was thrilled to have you all. Please go take a look at our status report on our website. We will have another webinar on an ICAP product, the ETS handbook launch on April 14th. So stay tuned for announcements around registration and launch of that. And otherwise, thank you so much for being here today, and have a nice day, afternoon, and evening. All the best.